There's something different about the world after midnight, something that hides in the silence between fluorescent buzz and distant footsteps. While most of the world sleeps, night shift workers stand guard in the loneliest corners of reality, gas stations, hospitals, warehouses, believing they're alone. But some shifts go wrong. Sometimes it isn't just the late hours that drain you, it's what watches from the dark, waits in silence, and follows you long after your shift ends. At night, we dive deep into 3 bone-chilling, true night shift horror stories. These are not tales of imagination. They're first-hand accounts from people who lived through the kind of night you don't forget, the kind that changes you. Turn off the lights and listen closely, because if you've ever worked the night shift, this might be your last. Story 1. The warehouse clock never struck 3 a.m. I don't really believe in unexplainable things. At least I didn't before the winter I worked night shifts alone at the Hayward distribution facility just outside of Chicago, where my job was supposed to be simple. Scan incoming pallets, stage outgoing orders, and keep a log of all truck activity overnight, with the occasional lift work or documentation for our daytime inventory crew who came in around 6 a.m. But the truth is, the actual work never bothered me. It was the quiet, the unnatural, sprawling quiet that bled into your ears until you couldn't hear your own breathing, without wondering if something was mimicking it back to you in the dark. Full. Because this warehouse was big, not a Costco stockroom a big, but airplane hangar big, with 30-foot ceilings, rows of tall steel racks stretching the length of a football field, and only 24 flickering halogen lights dotting the entire ceiling. Each one spaced too far apart, so the aisles in between felt like blind spots in your peripheral vision. And after a while, your eyes played tricks on you, especially during the 2:40 a.m. stretch when time crawled and your brain begged for stimulation. And maybe that's what started it. Maybe my mind just wanted a break, a jolt. But I swear to God this wasn't sleep deprivation. Not at first, because the first thing I noticed was that the warehouse clock mounted on the west wall facing the loading docks never ticked past 2:58 a.m. I mean never, like I'd look up from the scan gun or a clipboard, or from dragging a busted pallet out of aisle 19, and I'd glance at the time to see how much longer I had before sunrise, and it'd be 2:58 every time, and not like it was frozen either. The seconds would keep going. 2:58. 2:58 to 9. But the minute hand never moved past 2:58, and the second hand would loop back to 0 again and again like a scratched record. And I checked my phone. Of course I did. And it said 3:13, 3:26, 3:44. So I thought, oh, the wall clock's just broken. But the weird thing was, I felt like it was still 2:58, like my whole body, my whole being, was still stuck in that liminal dead air space where time stalls and shadows get thicker and your thoughts turn grainy. And when I brought it up with Carlos, the guy I swapped shifts with, he worked evenings, clocked out at midnight. He just gave me this weird half laugh and said, that thing's been like that for years, man. It's always 2:58 in this place. Which was funny at first, like a dumb joke about how time stands still on night shift. But then his eyes shifted, just a little, and he said, I just don't stand under it too long, and walked out, leaving me alone in a warehouse that had suddenly grown colder, somehow darker, and the next few nights I couldn't stop thinking about that clock. Couldn't stop watching it from the corner of my eye, waiting for it to move past 2:58, and I swear it felt like something was waiting with me, like I wasn't observing the clock. I was being timed, measured, inspected like a test subject in a sterile lab, and there was a night, maybe 4 days later, when I was staging a load of paint cans near the southern wall, and I saw movement, clear as day, at the edge of aisle 4, a tall figure stepping just into view, silhouetted by one of the overhead halogens that made its head and shoulders shimmer faintly, and my first instinct was to shout, "Hey!" because I thought someone had broken in or was messing with me, but the second I took a step toward it, the figure didn't move. It just tilted its head very slowly, and I don't know how to explain this, but I heard that tilt, like the air itself bent around it, a metallic creaking sound that made my molars vibrate, and I froze because I realized I couldn't see any features, no clothes, no face, no texture. It was just a man-shaped presence that seemed to be made of the same shadows it stood in, and when I finally blinked, it was gone. But my body wouldn't move. My legs were locked, like the adrenaline had overcompensated, and now my nervous system was rejecting movement, and my ears were ringing and my vision tunneled, and I just stood there until my body allowed me to move again. And when I got back to my station by the desk near the east entrance, I noticed something. The big digital log timer we used to track order prep. It was stuck to 2:58, 58, blinking, repeating that second over and over, and none of the scanner logs had updated since 2:58 either. Despite me scanning multiple pallets in the last 40 minutes, and when I checked the security feed, every camera on the west end of the building was glitching, showing these frames of empty aisles with slight rhythmic shifts in brightness like something just off screen was walking past the sensors every few seconds. And when I finally pulled up the live feed for the clock itself, mounted on cam 11, I nearly screamed. The second hand wasn't moving in a circle anymore. It was tapping back and forth. Like a metronome stuck in a short loop, and something below the clock, something long and thin, was hanging from the rafters gently, swaying as if a thick wire or a cable or maybe even a rope had been tied to the support beams, but there was no way that was standard equipment, and when I zoomed in, my stomach dropped, because it wasn't a rope. It was a hand, a pale, impossibly stretched hand, curled downward and swaying like a pendulum, and in the frame just before the feed froze, I saw fingers clack together like joints cracking on a piano keyboard, and the clock on camera finally hit 2:59, and everything shut off, all at once, the overheads, the scanners, the cameras, the sound of the heating units, all dead. And I was left standing in that vast cavernous silence with only the low humming echo of something breathing in the dark, something high above me. Something that seemed to be pacing along the metal rafters with deliberate steps that made the whole building groan with age and tension. And I ran, not out the front door, but deeper into the warehouse like an idiot, down between aisle 14 and 15 where the heavier equipment was stored, because I thought maybe I could climb into the forklift or wedge myself under one of the trailers to hide. But every time I turned a corner, the layout felt off, like the racks had subtly shifted behind me, or the boxes were stacked in new configurations that weren't there minutes ago. And the whole place started to feel like a looping hallway in a nightmare, and the air got thicker, like breathing through hot plastic, and somewhere in the darkness I heard the soft ticking again. 2:58, 1... And this whisper right at the base of my spine, like someone leaned in behind me and said, "We wait here." And I ran, finally made it to the loading dock, yanked the side door open, and the second I stepped outside, all the power came back on, floodlights blasted on, scanners beeped, the heating unit kicked back up, and the warehouse looked normal, like none of it had ever happened. And I stood in the snow with steam pouring off my skin, watching the time on my phone tick past 30, 31, 32, and I never went back. I left my badge, my vest, my paychecks, everything. And the worst part is, a few weeks later, I passed by the building on my way to a new job and saw someone else walking into that warehouse alone, night shift vest on, and I swear to God I heard a whisper in the back of my mind say, "It's always 2:58 in here." And now every time I see a wall clock freeze, or a shadow flicker where it shouldn't, or my phone lags for no reason at exactly 2:58 a.m., I don't ask questions, I just leave. Story 2. Room 616 wasn't on the roster. Everyone always says hospitals are haunted, not in the Hollywood, blood-dripping walls kind of way, but in the cold, clinical way that death leaves an impression, like a dent in the air. And after working 4 years of night shifts as a float nurse at Delmere Regional in upstate Illinois, I'd gotten used to strange sounds, patients talking to people who weren't there, doors swinging shut on their own, the usual, and I never considered myself superstitious. Just tired, maybe burned out, because night shift takes something out of you that no amount of sleep during the day ever puts back in. And that fall, I'd been floated to almost every wing we had. ICU, General Med, Psych, even Peds, but on October 22nd, I was assigned to South Wing 6, which I'd only worked once before, a long, oddly laid out hallway at the far end of the hospital with just 12 rooms, mostly for long-term or non-critical patients who needed overnight observation. And I remember when I walked past the nurse's station at 10:45 p.m. The CNA, Kaylee, I think her name was, handed me the patient sheet and said, "One of them's not real," in that joking way staff do when they've seen too much, and I gave her the usual fake laugh, not realizing until hours later she hadn't laughed back. But the sheet looked normal at first. 11 patients, nothing critical, 2 diabetics, one with early onset Alzheimer's, and a guy recovering from abdominal surgery who buzzed the call light every 5 minutes. But what I didn't notice until about midnight was that room 616 was listed on the log. And we don't have a room 616. Our rooms only go from 601 to 612, and I even walked the hallway twice to double check because I thought maybe I was forgetting something, or that maybe they'd opened a temporary isolation unit. But nope, no 616. Not on the room doors, not on the floor map, not on the MAR med-admin record, nothing. But there it was on my printed sheet, 616 Doyle, 74M palliative observation, do not resuscitate. And I figured it was an input error, probably meant 610 or 608. So I went back to the station to ask Kaylee, but she wasn't there, and her badge was gone from the desk, and the med drawer was locked. And I didn't hear her walking around or in the supply closet, which was weird because we always stay close on night shift, especially in South 6 where it gets quiet enough to hear your own thoughts breathing. And after paging her twice on the intercom with no reply, I did another round to make sure everyone was okay, and that's when I saw it, tucked between rooms 609 and 610, where there'd always been a blank patch of beige wall. There was now a door, heavy dark gray, unmarked, no room number, but with a thin metal plaque right above the knob that read as 616. And I stopped mid-stride, heart pounding, because I knew this wasn't right. The hall didn't have the plumbing for another room, and the nurses who'd been here 20 years always joked that South 6 was shaped weird because of the morgue on the floor below, but I'd never seen that door before. And the fluorescent light above it was flickering so subtly it made the door shimmer like a heat mirage, and I backed away, made a mental note to tell the charge nurse in the morning, and just kept walking, refusing to acknowledge the sudden chill in that section of the hallway. But less than 10 minutes later, as I was refilling a fluid bag in 607, my pager went off, the 616 requesting assistance. Just like that, on the display, and my first instinct was anger because I was sure now it was some kind of prank, some cruel joke Kaylee or another shift had cooked up to mess with float staff. But when I went back to the nurse's station, the door was open now. 616 was open. Oh no. Light on inside, and I couldn't see much, just part of a curtain in the edge of a hospital bed, and I told myself not to step in, just to call security or maybe go find someone else. But my body moved on autopilot like it always does when you're responding to a call light. You're trained to walk toward discomfort, not away from it, and I stepped inside and immediately felt like I'd left the hospital behind because the room was wrong, wider than it should have been, deeper too, like it stretched back into space that didn't belong to this building, and the temperature dropped a full 10 degrees instantly, and there was a patient in the bed, man in his 70s, pale, no nasal cannula, no foy, just lying there under a heavy, dark blue sheet with his eyes open and glassy like he'd already passed. And when I checked the monitor, there wasn't one, just an unplugged unit on the wall blinking red like it had been yanked free violently, and the man's name bracelet read him. Doyle, just like the sheet, but the skin on his arms looked worn, like parchment, and I noticed something else. The sound. There wasn't any, not the usual beeping or hallway air whoosh or even my own shoes scuffing the floor, just a deep, muffled static that seemed to come from inside my ears. And when I turned to leave, the door was gone, just smooth wall where it had been, and the light above me began to dim in these soft pulses, like a heartbeat failing, and the man in the bed whispered something, barely audible, but it was my name, clear as day, and I hadn't said a word since entering. And I asked, "What is this?" But his lips didn't move again, Instead, the room itself answered like the walls breathed, and I heard this low chorus of whispers repeating, "You've been here," and then I remembered, or thought I did. A memory I couldn't possibly have, standing in the same room 10 years earlier in a different uniform, a different name on my badge, holding a chart with the same patient's face on it, and I felt this nauseating, dizzy wave of deja vu, so intense I collapsed to my knees. And suddenly I was outside the room again, just standing in the hallway outside 610 like nothing had happened, except now the door to 616 was gone again, like it had never existed, and Kaylee was back at the station, acting like she hadn't disappeared for an hour, and when I asked her about room 616, she looked confused and said, "We don't have a 616, and I showed her the log sheet, but now the patient list only had 11 rooms, and Doyle's name was gone, replaced with a handwritten CIU floor, which made no sense because IQ hadn't admitted anyone knew that night. And when I checked the charting system, there was an old file for a Martin Doyle, but he died in 2013 while in palliative care on a different floor, and his cause of death was listed as a non-responsive cardiac event during routine vitals. And the nurse on duty was someone named Madison Green, but the photo ID attached was me, 10 years younger, hair dyed differently, but unmistakably me, and I have no memory, none of ever going by that name or working in palliative care, and the more I searched, the more I realized I had charted hundreds of logs under a Madison Green at hospitals I never applied to, at wings that had been shut down for years, and now every few weeks when I work the night shift, doesn't matter the floor, I'll see it out of the corner of my eye, a door that shouldn't be there, just for a second, always unmarked, always gray, and always slightly ajar, and I've learned not to open it, not anymore, because I know what's waiting on the other side, and sometimes when the night is quiet and I'm alone with the low beep of monitors and my own thoughts again, I'll find a blank chart in the pile at the nurse's station, no patient label, no date, just the words as 616 observe only no resuscitation scrawled across the top, and I burn them now, every time, because I know if I don't, I'll wake up one morning and forget who I am again. Walk into a door that shouldn't exist and never walk back out. Story 3. He only paid in change. I used to work the overnight shift at a rundown gas station off Route 191 in southern New Mexico, a place so far out in the desert that by the time your phone lost signal, you still had another 15 miles of nothing before the glowing red of gas plus snacks sign pierced the night like a flickering silhouette. And the weirdest part wasn't the isolation or the coyotes that came too close to the dumpster. It was how routine it became, how comfortable I got with the silence. With the dusty shelves and half-lit coolers and that one flickering camera above pump 4 that nobody ever fixed, and maybe that's why I didn't question it right away when strange things started happening, because the human brain will do anything to preserve a sense of normal, even if it has to lie to itself. But if I'm being honest, it started on a Tuesday early March, 2:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I was refilling the scratch card display and watching the seconds crawl by on the little digital clock by the register, waiting for my break, so I could sit outside and smoke, when this old, rusted-out pickup pulled in, a 70s Ford, beige with one blue door. Tires bald as hell, and I remember thinking, no way that thing made it more than 5 miles, but it pulled up to pump 3 and just sat there, engine idling too quietly, and I didn't see anyone get out, so after a minute or two I tapped the console to activate thinking maybe they were waiting on me, but the system glitched. It wouldn't authorize, and then the screen just froze with this weird static EP pattern, like someone had plugged a VCR into a toaster, and then, all at once, the lights on pump 3 went out, and just pump 3, and I felt that cold flush crawl over my arms, that gut-level wrongness you feel before anything happens, and I told myself it was electric, even though I knew damn well the wiring here was sectioned off by zone and one pump going dark should have killed at least 2 others. But before I could even walk outside, heard the door chime behind me, and in walks this man, if you could call him that, wearing a denim jacket 2 sizes too big and a trucker hat pulled so low I couldn't see his eyes, and he moved like he was on some kind of delay, like each step took a second longer than it should, like he was being puppeted by someone trying to remember how people move. And he walks straight up to the counter, pulls a fistful of coins from his pocket, nickels, pennies, a few quarters so old they look black, and drops them one by one on the counter without saying a word. And I asked him how much gas you need, but he didn't answer. Didn't look at me, just stood there waiting, breathing slow, shallow, audible, and when I leaned forward slightly, trying to catch his eyes, he finally said in a voice so dry, it sounded like sandpaper against a tin can, "I paid last week," and I said, "What? What?" Confused, and he repeated it, same tone, same words, "I paid last week," and I glanced down at the change and saw something that made my stomach turn. A buffalo nickel, shiny and wet with something dark red around the edge, and I don't know why, but I reached for it, and the moment I touched it, everything went quiet. I don't mean the music stopped or the fridge hum died. I mean everything. Like the whole world went on mute, and the lights flickered, not a glitchy flicker, but a slow dimming. Like something massive had passed between us and the power source, and I looked back up and the man was gone, not walking away, not leaving, just gone. And I looked outside and the truck was still there. But now the pump hose was lying on the ground, nozzle bent, dragging toward the edge of the parking lot like it had been pulled, and there were no footprints, no tire marks, no sound. And when I stepped outside, the heat hit me, not desert heat, but unnatural heat, like standing too close to a car that had been running for hours. And the air had this metallic taste like blood and pennies, and I followed the pump hose with my eyes and saw it led toward the side of the building, toward the empty lot we never used. And just before it disappeared behind the dumpster, I swear I saw it twitch, like something was pulling it slowly, like a vein being tugged. And I went back inside and locked the doors and told myself it was fatigue or stress. Maybe a prank. But when I checked the security feed, the system had looped. Every camera, every angle, playing the same 6 seconds over and over. Me behind the counter, standing still, staring, like I was waiting for something, and when I tried to reset it, the entire system crashed and rebooted into a black screen that just said it transaction approved, no date, no time, no code. And when the morning shift guy came in, "Mark," I told him I was sick and needed to go home. And he looked at me like I'd just gotten out of a mine shaft, pale, shaking, pupils huge, and he said, "You okay, man? You've been here for 2 days." And I said, "No, that's not possible. I only clocked in last night." And he said, "You called in sick yesterday, but you were still here. I saw you on the cameras. You didn't go home. And when I checked the time card, oh wait, there were 2 punches for me, one at 9:57 p.m. on Monday and one again at 9:58 p.m. on Tuesday. No clock out in between, just continuous, and I don't remember any of it. And that was the first time, but not the last, because now he comes back. Same truck, same change. Always in the middle of the week, always between 2:20 and 2:30 a.m. And every time I see him, I lose time, not just minutes or hours, but whole days. And my body starts to show things I don't remember happening. Cuts on my forearms, blisters on my feet, like I've been walking for miles, my uniform torn or damp, like I've been outside during a storm we didn't have. And sometimes I hear a second voice in the store, over the intercom or behind the freezer doors, whispering you already served him. And last week, I got a bill in the mail from a gas station 200 miles away, a purchase made in my name, with my employee code at 2:17 a.m. on a night I was supposedly here, and the receipt had a note at the bottom in tiny print that read, "Paid in full. See you again next week." And now I don't know who I'm working for anymore, or how long I've been working, or if the man in the truck is even a man or something else, some debt collector for lost time, for forgotten people, for all the things that bleed through the cracks of reality during night shift when nobody's watching. And the only reason I keep showing up is because the last time I didn't, I woke up on the bathroom floor at the station with blood on my palms, my locker open, my uniform soaked, and a single coin in my mouth, blackened, warm, and pulsing like it was alive. And taped to the register was a note in my own handwriting I don't remember writing. "You served him again. Good, keep the lights on. If you've made it this far, you already know. The night shift isn't just long hours and tired eyes. It's a passage into a world that doesn't follow the rules of day. Time warps, shadows breathe, and sometimes something watches just beyond the edge of the light. These stories were real, reported, remembered, and retold, because the people who lived them couldn't forget, no matter how hard they tried. Let this be your warning. If you ever find yourself working deep into the night, don't ignore the flickering lights. Don't answer the door that wasn't there yesterday. And whatever you do, don't trust the clock. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay alive, and remember, night doesn't fall, it descends.